happy 2025. I cannot believe 2024 is over. I feel like I blinked and the whole year just disappeared. I did, however, read some really good and some really bad books last year, so today we are ranking all 90 books I read in 2024. I am first and foremost a fantasy reader, but I do read a lot of other things like sci-fi, murder mystery thrillers, horror, and some romance. I never used to dabble in the romance genre, but this past year I definitely dipped my toes in. And I actually did have a lot of fun. I feel like my heart isn't as cold and shriveled and Grinch-like as I used to think it was. And obviously before I get into this, just take all my opinions with a grain of salt. Not every book is going to be everyone's cup of tea, and if I happened to have disliked a book you really loved, that's like nothing against you, it just wasn't for me. Alright, so without any further ado, let's get into tier ranking all these books. So obviously on the top we have God tier, which is pretty self-explanatory. These are my favorite books I read last year. These are the best of the best, the creme de la creme, whereas the books in Living in My Head Rent-Free just didn't quite reach that. They're ones I definitely would recommend that I really enjoyed, but just weren't quite perfect. Then in the words of Abby Lee, we have You Were Good, I'm Waiting for You to Be Great. Again, these are books that I definitely enjoyed and would recommend, but definitely have some flaws. Then we have I Forgot That You Existed, books that I literally found forgettable, or just really weren't for me, and then below that we have Jail. These are the books I seriously didn't like, would not recommend, and probably should have DNF'd. Oh, and I'm obviously not providing any sort of summaries for any of these books. If I did that, we would be here all day. So let's just get right into it with Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. Now this is actually kind of a funny one for me because objectively I don't think it's that great of a book. It's definitely not that new. There's a lot of times where I was laughing or rolling my eyes. However, I really liked this book, so I am going to put it in You Were Good, I'm Waiting for You to Be Great. I don't know what it is about this book, it just felt really fun and nostalgic for me, plus I love dragons. Alright, then we have Annie Bot, which was nominated for a Goodreads award, I think the sci-fi category. And I did think it deserved that nominee. I'm going to put Annie Bot in Living in My Head Rent-Free. This is not going to be for everyone, and I would check your trigger warnings, but I thought it was a really effective and interesting exploration of humanity and what makes a person as well as emotional abuse. Alright, then we have Belladonna, and this one might be a little controversial because I know people are loving this book right now. However, I'm gonna put it in I Forgot That You Existed because I did really like the setup in the first 50%, but that last half got really goofy for me. It was kind of the romance that killed it for me, if I'm being honest. I just didn't find it believable and it was kind of cringy. Alright, then we have Assassin's Apprentice, the first book in this entire Robin Hobb world. I really loved this, however, I am going to put it in Living in My Head Rent-Free. Now this is because as much as I loved this character-driven fantasy, it had a really rich world building, it is very slow. Oh, then we have A Fragile Enchantment. I read this in December. Unfortunately, I'm going to put this in I Forgot That You Existed. There are parts of this that I really enjoyed, and it had a really fun kind of Regency setting. However, I feel like we were following the most boring characters of all time. There was a lot of political things happening on the outskirts of the plot, but it was never centered. Also, this is very much inspired by the Irish potato famine and England's role in it, but for some reason we're on the side of the English or the oppressors, and I will never understand that decision. Oh, and then we have A Fire Endless by Rebecca Ross. I know everyone loves Divine Rivals by her, but if you haven't read her other series, The Elements of Cadence, which this one is the second and final book in, you have to do so. This book is going in God tier because I thought it was absolutely incredible. I love everything about this series, from the plot decisions to the characters. Oh, some of my favorite characters ever are in this series. I feel like Rebecca Ross in this series really excelled at writing relationships between our characters, whether that be a romance or a friendship or a familial relationship. Okay, next we have our first mystery. This is All the Dangerous Things, and unfortunately I really didn't like this. I'm gonna put this in I Forgot That You Existed because I kind of genuinely forgot about this book. In this book, we're following a mother who is desperately searching for her missing child, but I feel like the mom basically never thought about or really seemed all that concerned about her child. Plus, I just thought the mystery was really obvious and I wasn't a big fan of the ending. There's some cool stuff with sleepwalking here, but that's pretty much the only good thing I can say. Oh, and then we have A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. I am gonna put this in, Living in My Head Rent-Free or You Were Good, I'm Waiting for You to Be Great. Okay, I'm gonna put it in the middle just because while I really enjoyed it and I thought it was a really fun, well-written mystery, just nothing was that special about it for me. Also, I did watch the TV show and I was not a big fan of the changes they made. I definitely think the book is better. And then we have All Systems Red. I am tempted to put this in God tier, but I think I am going to put it in Living in My Head Rent Free. As much as I enjoyed this, it is a very short novella. It's 140 pages, I think. And I just feel like there wasn't enough there for me to put it in God tier yet. However, this is an entire series, so I could definitely see me ranking the other books higher. We are following a character called Murderbot in this book, and I love Murderbot. That and the plot was really fun and action-packed. Alright, moving on, we have the 10,000 Doors of January. And I'm really sad about this one. This was the first book I read last year. I'm gonna put this in I Forgot That You Existed. Unfortunately, as much as I loved the writing style and concept of this book, the execution fell flat for me. Our main character is a teenager, but she was so painfully naive that at multiple points I wanted to throw this book across the room. And I did read another book by Alex E. Hero last year that I thought was better. Alright, then we have A Sorceress Comes to Call by T. Kingfisher. This was actually my first T. Kingfisher book, and it was so good. It was her new release last year, and I'm really tempted to put it in God tier. It wasn't perfect, but I really, really liked it, so you know what, let's put it up there for now. I don't want to be stingy. I find that I definitely can be stingy with my 5 stars. And while this wasn't a 5-star, it was really close. It is a dark fairy tale retelling of The Goose Girl, and I've since found out that T. Kingfisher just really excels at a story like that. I loved her writing style, the characters, and the found family, but I admittedly found the villain to be a little bit one note. Alright, then we have A Flicker in the Dark. This is also by Stacey Willingham, who wrote All the Dangerous Things. I did think this one was much better than that, so I'm gonna put it in You Were Good. I'm Waiting for You to Be Great. I did find the characters in this book to be pretty unlikable, and I guessed the twist way, way too early. However, to be fair, I read this right after a book with the exact same twist. So that might have had something to do with it, to be fair, and I thought it was a pretty well-written mystery with solid red herrings. Oh, and speaking of unimpressed, we have A Fate Inked in Blood. I am going to put this in I Forgot That You Existed instead of Jail because I thought the first half of this book was pretty decent. It's a Norse Viking inspired fantasy world and the setup was pretty interesting. There was some really cool action going on, but the last half just went downhill so quickly for me. Alright, then we have A Study in Drowning by Ava Reid. This was my first Ava Reid book, and I did really, really like it, but it isn't without its flaws. I thought the romance was really cute, but a bit insta-levy, and as much as I enjoyed the dark, gothic fairy tale story and setting, the world building was a little bit weak. Also, I'm very excited that the author announced there's going to be a second book in this series. I'm definitely going to read it. It's coming out later this year. Next is All That Consumes Us by Erica Waters. I'm gonna put this in You Were Good, I'm Waiting for You to Be Great. This is a dark academia set at a college that has a secret society, so the vibes are definitely there. And this leans a little bit more into horror with ghostly things happening, which I very much enjoyed. It's just that the main character was pretty much insufferable. That, and as much as the concept was cool, it took until about halfway through for the plot to get going, which in my opinion was far, far too long. Oh, and then we have Book Lovers. I read almost every Emily Henry book last year except for Beach Read, which I read in 2023. Book Lovers, I'm gonna put in God tier actually. This is by far my favorite Emily Henry book and probably the best romance I've ever read. And like I said before, I'm not really a big or never was a big romance person, so for me to say that, I feel like it is saying something. The way Emily Henry writes her characters and her settings, I just absolutely adore. She has almost a bit more of a literary fiction style. It's still fun and cutesy, but something about her books, it just really speaks to me. I like the way she flips stereotypes and tropes on their head in Book Lovers. This also is probably one of my favorite third act breakup or crises in a romance. I hate when it's just based on miscommunication, and this one is not about miscommunication. It's about external circumstances, which is just my favorite. Then we have Bride by Ali Hazelwood. I think I'm gonna put this in You Were Good, I'm Waiting for You to Be Great. I really enjoy and have a lot of fun with Ali Hazelwood's books, but I don't know if I would ever rank any of them higher than this tier. All of her books are just a little bit cringy for me, but this is her paranormal romance with vampires and werewolves, and maybe it's just the 12-year-old who loved Twilight in me, but I had a lot of fun with this book. And we have Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll. I'm gonna put this in Living in My Head rent-free. This is kind of a true crime book based on Ted Bundy, and I say kind of because it is not about the killer or Bundy at all. In fact, the killer is never named in this book, which I really enjoyed. Jessica Knoll is putting the spotlight and the story back onto the victims. They're the ones we're talking about and following the entire book, and we're not talking about the killer so much. But it isn't about him and his genius. In fact, it's the opposite. So I found that to be incredibly refreshing. Then we have Funny Story by Emily Henry. This is her new release. I am gonna put this in You Were Good and Waiting for You to Be Great. I thought the premise of this book was really funny. We're following two people who their exes left them for each other, and then they end up fake dating, if that makes any sense at all. It was really funny. And again, Emily Henry kills it with her settings. I just wasn't fully buying into the romance between these two characters. All right, then we have Electra by Jennifer Saint. I'm gonna put this one in You Were Good and Waiting for You to Be Great as well. We are following three women who surround the Trojan War. So Electra, Cassandra, and Clytemnestra. I very much enjoyed Clytemnestra and Cassandra's perspectives, but I absolutely could not stand Electra's. And I know that's kind of the point. I don't think she's supposed to be a likable character, but it still kind of killed it for me. Then we have Gallows Hill by Darcy Coates. I've read almost every book by this author at this point, and she writes a really solid haunted house story, which is my personal favorite. I am going to put this one in Living in My Head rent-free because I think it is one of her best so far. There are ghosts and these almost zombie-like creatures, and there was an actual fulfilling reason for why these characters couldn't just move out of the haunted house. And then we have Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. I read this entire trilogy this year, and this one was definitely my favorite. I'm also going to put this one in God tier. I never thought I would see a day where I was putting two romances in God tier, but here we are. Abby Jimenez is a really skilled author, and I appreciate the way she dives into these characters. It's not just about the romance between them, but it's about their own personal struggles and identities, which for me was the most interesting part. Alright, then we have Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. This is actually my first Octavia Butler book. I read this for my book club because I joined not one but two book clubs last year. Definitely recommend, by the way, if you love to read but don't really know other people who like to do so. It's a great way to get out of the house and meet people as an adult. Anyway, I'm gonna put Parable of the Sower in Living in My Head rent-free. This is a dystopian book written in the 90s, set in the year 2024, and it actually does hit really close to home. All of the stuff happening in this society, I could see happening. It's taking all of our current issues and just turning the dial up to 10. I will say because of that, it can definitely be very disturbing, and it's a pretty brutal book. I would definitely check trigger warnings for this one. Then we have Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. This is the first book in the Just for the Summer trilogy. It's actually called the Part of Your World series. And I'm gonna put this one in Living in My Head rent-free. I think this is definitely the cheesiest book of the three, but I still thought it was so cute. Plus there's a baby goat, so who could want more than that? The Haunting of Blackwood House. This is another Darcy Coates book. I am gonna put this one in I Forgot That You Existed. Very unfortunate. If you like Darcy Coates and a haunted house story, I would still read it, but the main character in this book was so incredibly naive and frustrating. So while the ghostly aspects were okay, I just couldn't get over the main character. Alright, then we have The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. I am also gonna put this in I Forgot That You Existed. I feel so bad because actually a friend of mine recommended this to me, and I read 3 of Riley Sager's books in December, but this one was my least favorite. I've just read this book of unreliable main character spies on neighbors far too many times. And I don't think there was anything particularly unique about this book except for the twist ending, which I thought was absolutely bonkers. Listen, I love a good twist or reveal, but it has to have something behind it. Something that you can look back on and go, oh my god, I can't believe I missed that. Yeah, a twist is about the author fooling the audience, not about just randomly introducing something that was totally out of left field that had basically nothing to do with this world or story until then. And that's what happens in this book, so I get why people would like this because they'd be impressed by this twist, but for me it was the opposite. Alright, then we have Stone Blind, and ooh, part of me wants to put this in jail. I'm gonna put it in I Forgot That You Existed. Going into this, I thought this was going to be a Greek mythological retelling following Medusa, but we're actually following basically any and every god or mythological figure surrounding Medusa, which so much of Greek mythology is interconnected, so it kind of makes sense, but I think it just ends up bloating the story. It got to the point where I didn't really even understand what Natalie Haynes was trying to do. The reason I'm not putting it in jail is because I did really like her writing style. Oh, and then we have Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. Yeah, I'm gonna put this in God tier. I absolutely loved this book. This is the coziest fairy tale inspired story following a scholar and her frenemy / co-worker Wendell Bamblebee. I love the characters. I love Shadow the dog. I like how it is inspired by actual dark, gritty fairy tales. None of this new age Sarah J Maas style fairies. It was genuinely actually kind of eerie at points, and it definitely follows the almost plot structure of an actual fairy tale, which I found to be really, really fun. And you know what? I'm just gonna go find the second book in this series. Where is it? People are probably seeing it and screaming at me. Oh, there it is. Okay. I'm gonna put the second book, Emily Wilde's Map of the Other Lands, also on the top. Hold on. I actually thought this second book was even better than the first. I just thought the plot pacing was a little bit improved. For me, these are like a cozy, warm hug, and yes, I am anxiously waiting for the third book. Oh, and then we have Not in Love by Ali Hazelwood, and this is the first one going in jail. Like I said, I usually really enjoy and get a lot of entertainment from Ali Hazelwood's book, but this one was not the case. And it's not because it's more of an erotic romance than her other books. She says that in the beginning, and that's not what I dislike about it. I just really, really hate our male main character. We're following Rue and Eli, I think is his name, and Rue's perspective, I don't really mind. It's fine, it's pretty standard for Ali Hazelwood, but we also get Eli's perspective in this book, which is a first for this author. And that is where this book fell apart for me. I just could not stand being in this man's head. It was absolutely terrible, made me cringe. I could not stand him. Next is The Ex-Hex by Erin Sterling. I'm gonna put this in You Were Good, I'm Waiting for You to Be Great. This is just a really cute witchy romance set near Halloween. I thought it was really fun, really sweet, but you know, it wasn't anything super special for me. The Heart of Betrayal, actually I'm gonna find, yes, The Kiss of Deception. So I read this entire trilogy this year. The Kiss of Deception was a reread. I actually read it for the first time when it came out 10 years ago when I was a teenager. This is a YA. I would call it a romantasy, but 10 years ago we didn't really use that term. I am gonna put the first book, The Kiss of Deception, in jail. I am so sorry. There are some really cool things about this series. I see why people love it, but nothing happens for the first 2/3 to 3/4 of this book. It is literally just following this princess named Leah flirting around this village. That is it. Stuff starts to happen and there's a big reveal and there's a lot of action in the last quarter, but that just wasn't enough to really justify this book for me. I did, however, think The Heart of Betrayal was much, much better. I'm gonna put that in You Were Good, I'm Waiting for You to Be Great. I still think that the world building is a little lacking and the magic system isn't super well described, but the second book was far, far better than the first. There is a lot more political scheming going on and a lot more action, so I actually did definitely enjoy the second book. And I am going to put the third book in the same tier. That is The Beauty of Darkness. I don't think this was quite as good as the second book because I wasn't fully happy with the ending. I just thought it ended a bit too easily. Happy Place by Emily Henry. I'm gonna put this in Living in My Head rent-free. I know I mentioned that I hate miscommunication, and that is definitely rampant in this book, but for some reason, I still really liked this one. There's just something about the characters in this one, in the setting. I was just really rooting for everyone. Then we have Loathe to Love You. I'm gonna put this in I Forgot That You Existed. This is the bind up of the Ali Hazelwood novellas. They were fine. I wouldn't say any of them were particularly memorable though. Oh, and then we have People We Meet on Vacation. Unfortunately, this is my least favorite Emily Henry book, but I still think it's a solid effort, so I'm going to put it in You Were Good. I'm waiting for you to be great. I just wasn't that interested in the Palm Springs setting of this book. The main character, Poppy, was a little bit annoying for me, and also I just don't know if I found the couple in this book to be all that compatible. Oh, and then we have Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson. Let me actually find The Way of Kings because I read both of these books in 2024. These are the first two books in the Stormlight archive. Here it is. Okay. Unsurprisingly, if you know me and know how much I love Brandon Sanderson, I'm going to put The Way of Kings and Words of Radiance in God tier. These books, this series is one of the most epic, impeccable fantasy series I have ever read. I'm serious, if you are a fantasy lover and you have not picked up these books, what are you doing? He puts the epic in epic fantasy. You love the characters. The world building is just expansive and mind-blowing and so gripping. There's a lot of action, but there's also a lot of heart and struggles with the characters. Like Kaladin in the first book, you will probably cry. I could sit here and rave about these two books all day. They are seriously not only two of the best books I read last year, but two of the best books I have ever read, period. If that hasn't convinced you to read them, I don't know what would. And on that note, I am going to go make tea because my voice sounds terrible. Alrighty, I am back with some much needed tea. In case anyone is curious, I'm drinking Salted Caramel by Harney & Sons in my Alice in Wonderland mug. Alrighty, back to business. We have The Last House on Needless Street by Katrina Ward. This was another book club pick, and I'm gonna put this in Living in My Head Rent-Free. Like all good horror, The Last House on Needless Street is using these scary events to explore deeper and more emotional themes. While I did enjoy the kind of reveal, I'm not going to say anything to spoil it, but there is a reveal in this book that I could understand people not liking. I can't really say anything else without spoiling it, but yeah. Oh, and then we have Icebreaker by Hannah Grace. This book is going straight to jail. I didn't necessarily go into this book expecting it to be amazing, but I wasn't expecting it to be that bad, and I'm so sorry if you love this book, but it was not for me. I mean, it's a romance between a hockey player and an ice skater in college, and it barely even attempts to have a plot. There are a lot of spicy scenes that I just giggled my way through, including in the backseat of an Uber. What? Another one in a club bathroom while the main male character is dressed up like Gru from Despicable Me. I will admit I found this to be endlessly entertaining, but it definitely wasn't good. I don't think it was well written. There were too many tropes, too many ridiculous things, and it just went on and on and on. In what world does a romance book need to be over 400 pages? And then we have The Flat Share by Beth O'Leary. I'm gonna put this in I Forgot That You Existed because, frankly, I kind of did. I didn't mind the characters. I didn't really like the third act crisis. I kind of just thought that one of the characters acted a bit prematurely in that situation. Oh, and then we have Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross, a TikTok darling. And I did enjoy this, so I'm gonna put this in Living in My Head Rent-Free. It's emotional, it's tender-hearted. I will say though, the world building is definitely lacking. I'm hoping we get more of that in book 2. I feel like we just got the barest of information about the gods in this war and how the kind of magic in this world works. So maybe I should be putting this in You Were Good. I'm waiting for you to be great, but my enjoyment level of this book really bumps it up to Living in My Head Rent-Free. Alright, then we have Defiant by Brandon Sanderson. I am gonna also put this in Living in My Head Rent-Free because Brandon Sanderson just knows how to do a good finale. This is the last book in a series, so I can't say too much. I will say, again, great ending. It has the classic Sanderlanche. I loved the slugs, if you know what I mean. This is a really, really fun sci-fi YA series from him. If you haven't read it, I definitely recommend it. Okay, the screen is getting really tight here. Let's move on to Mysteries of Thorn Manor. I'm gonna put this in Living in My Head Rent Free. Now, this is just a novella following Sorcery of Thorns. I wouldn't say it's necessary to read, but if you liked that book, you should read this. It was fun. It actually had a plot that I thought added to the world, and it's just cute. I love Silas, and he's probably one of my favorite characters I've read about this year. In fact, we're also going to put Sorcery of Thorns in this tier. Let me find it. Here it is. Sorcery of Thorns was also a lot of fun. This is a YA fantasy with a little bit of romance. There's sorcerers and books that can turn into monsters. It's not a perfect book. I definitely question some things like how the main character knew how to fight so quickly. And the main villain is definitely a little bit obvious in my opinion, and he's a bit cartoony, a bit of a mustache twirling villain, if you will. But I just really, really liked it. Hellbent, I am also putting in Living in My Head Rent Free. I thought this was a great sequel and follow-up to Ninth House. I've heard some really mixed opinions on this, and people really didn't like this. They thought Ninth House was much better, but I'm the opposite. I think Hellbent was far better than Ninth House. There are some time skips and things in Ninth House that definitely got really confusing, and I think that Leigh Bardugo did a much better job with that in Hellbent. Alright, then we have Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. You know what? I am actually going to put it, You Were Good, I'm Waiting for You to Be Great. Because while I do really like it and I just like Taylor Jenkins Reid, I don't know if it's Living in My Head Rent Free. I feel like this is probably the most forgettable of her books so far. Death at Morning House by Maureen Johnson. Oh, I'm gonna put this in You Were Good, I'm Waiting for You to Be Great. We're bouncing back and forth between the past and the present in this book. I did find the chapters in the past to be a lot more compelling, but I thought the big reveal kind of flopped for me. Not that I thought the reveal was bad, it was just very anticlimactic. City of Ghosts by Victoria Schwab. I'm also gonna put in You Are Good, I'm Waiting for You to Be Great. This is actually a middle grade horror novel set in Edinburgh. That was my favorite part. I actually studied abroad in Edinburgh, and Victoria Schwab, I think, went to grad school or something there. I will say she got the city spot on. It is such a fun gothic setting for a spooky ghost story. I do think I would have liked this better if I, was a middle schooler, and I can't really hold that against this book since it is intended for that audience. It was still fun, I still enjoyed it. If you're an adult, you probably still would like it, but I wouldn't say it particularly impressed me. Same Time Next Summer by Annabel Monaghan. This is my first Annabel Monaghan book, and I don't think it'll be my last, but I definitely didn't like this one. Part of me wants to put it in jail. I think I'm just gonna put it in I Forgot That You Existed. It wasn't that offensive. I just definitely don't think it was good. This is sort of a second chance romance between high school sweethearts, but our main character, whose name I can't even remember now, is literally engaged and planning her wedding to another man. There's no, literal cheating that happens, but it's definitely an emotional affair, and I don't care how annoying and sucky the fiance is. He didn't do anything to warrant that. What Lies in the Woods by Kate Alice Marshall. I am gonna put this, either in You Were Good or Living in My Head Rent Free. You know what, I'm gonna put it in Living in My Head Rent Free. I thought it was well written. There are a lot of red herrings and suspects and clues. Plus, I was really invested in the friendship dynamic between these three little girls. Of course, they're grown adults in this book, but it has to do with the stuff they were doing in the woods as children, which might not have been fully normal, is what I'll say. Alrighty, now we have the September House by Carissa Orlando. I'm gonna put this one up in Living in My Head Rent Free. This book is one of the most unique books I've ever read. This is a horror that I guess takes place in a pretty common haunted house. I wouldn't say any of the ghosts or spooky happenings are all that new or unique, but it is using this house and the hauntings as a metaphor for domestic violence and emotional abuse, which I thought was such a cool idea. Yeah, sometimes it's a little bit on the nose, but overall, I still thought it was really effective. One of Us is back. I'm gonna put And I Forgot That You Existed because this is the third book in the One of Us is Lying series. I had no idea this book was released. And if I'm being totally honest, I kind of feel like it didn't need to be. It's pretty repetitive, you know. I guess it wraps up the series, so I can give it positive points for that. But nothing new happens in this book, and I kind of just read it and went, okay. And I'll probably never think about it again. Lock Every Door by Riley Sager. I'm gonna put this in You Were Good, I'm Waiting for You to Be Great. This was the second out of the 3 Riley Sager books I read this year, and it was good. I don't know. I thought the reveal was pretty different and also had some good lead up, but I just wasn't at all attached to the characters. I don't think Riley Sager excels at writing characters. Almost all of them seemingly have no personality. I mean, this main character whose name I can't even remember, she's actually unemployed, and she spends a good chunk of the book just staring at the wallpaper, literally going, what do people do when they're unemployed? I have no hobbies. And I'm like, oh my god, it is a cardboard cutout character. She has no personality. Right, then we have The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett. I'm gonna put this, this is hard. And You Were Good, I'm Waiting for You to Be Great. We're following these 2 characters, these 2 sisters, who are able to be white passing. This is set between, I think, the 50s and the 80s. We also end up following their 2 daughters. One of the sisters ends up living her life as a white woman, and the other does not. And it's sort of a study about how their lives diverge. For me, I wish we had focused more on these original sisters and less on their daughters. I understand why their daughters were included and why that's important to the narrative and the themes, but I just couldn't care about them as much as I did about the moms. Also, there is a trans character, and I don't know if this is what the author intended, but I kind of feel like Brit Bennett's trying to draw a parallel between passing as white and our trans character passing as a man, and something about that feels kind of icky and off to me. But then again, take all that with a grain of salt, because obviously I am a white cis woman, so I can't provide any sort of direct commentary on that. I just don't know how I feel about that being paralleled. One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. Yep, I'm gonna put this one in Living in My Head rent-free. The magic system is incredibly unique, you know, using this set of magical playing cards, and it has a really fun gothic setting. I'm a sucker for a gothic setting, I must admit. Plus, the whole concept of our main character having a literal monster living in her head, loved it. Absolutely loved it. Actually, I am gonna put 2 Twisted Crowns. Ooh. Okay, I'm not gonna put it in the top tier. It's not quite God tier, but it's close. I think 2 Twisted Crowns is even better than One Dark Window. I'm like, this is how you do a sequel. It was emotional, it was satisfying, it wrapped up the world and the lore. I had such a good time, and I cannot wait for Rachel Gillig's new release this year. Okay, now we are on This Is How You Lose the Time War, and this might be controversial, but I'm putting this in You Were Good, but I'm Waiting for You to Be Great. I loved the poetic prose in this book. It's definitely not for everyone, but I am a sucker for lyrical writing. And I see why this is so beloved. You're following these 2 agents on opposite sides of a time war. So yes, this is a sci-fi, but it's not about the sci-fi world. It's about the relationship between these 2 characters. They start off as enemies and then fall in love throughout letters. And as much as I appreciated the letters and, you know, this concept, they just went from being enemies to being in love so quickly, and I never really understood why they were falling in love with each other. I sort of just shrugged and went along with it and enjoyed the ride, but I never got why. Followed by another potentially controversial one, we have Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. This is the 2nd book in the Part of Your World series. Part of me wants to put this in I Forgot That You Existed, but I'm gonna be nice and put it in You Were Good, I'm Waiting for You to Be Great, because there are great parts about this book. Jacob, our main male love interest, is truly one of the best characters. I loved him. I see why our main female character, Brianna, fell in love with him. He is the best, and the way Abby Jimenez writes about and explores his anxiety was so good. However, because there is a however, I couldn't stand the miscommunication in this book. It was rampant and it almost ruined it for me, if I'm being honest. The It Girl by Ruth Ware, we're gonna put And I Forgot That You Existed. This is ultimately a very forgettable mystery thriller. I thought it was a fairly generic mystery thriller and it went on for far too long. Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter. I'm gonna put this in You Were Good, I'm Waiting for You to Be Great. I do think this is really well written, but it's incredibly disturbing. And I say this as someone who doesn't really care about that kind of thing. I don't usually check trigger warnings. I love horror. This is very disturbing, like much more so than your typical mystery thriller, so I would definitely check trigger warnings before going into this. I don't think it was necessarily gratuitous, because this kind of stuff does happen, but it turned out to be less of a traditional murder mystery thriller and almost more of a like FBI car chase thriller. Dead Voices by Catherine Arden. I'm gonna put this one in You Are Good, I'm Waiting for You to Be Great. This is the second book in her middle grade horror series. The first one is Small Spaces. And I kind of feel the same way about this one as I did about City of Ghosts, where I'm just not the intended audience. It was set in a snowed-in ski lodge that used to be an orphanage, so very scary setting. And I really like the characters in this. I do just think that Small Spaces was a bit more unique for me. Iron Flame, this is the second Fourth Wing book. I'm also going to put this one in You Were Good, I'm Waiting for You to Be Great. I know some people don't like this. I didn't think it was bad. Do I think it was perfect? No. Do I think Fourth Wing was a little bit better? Yes. But you know what? I still really enjoyed this book. These Hollow Vows by Lexi Ryan. Straight to Jail. I am so sorry if you love this book, but it is one of the most derivative, poorly written, unoriginal books I have ever read. This is basically taking the selection and ACOTAR and smushing them together like, copy my homework, but don't make it too obvious. However, to me it was obvious, and I don't think it was well executed. I can forgive things for not being that original if they're well done. This one just wasn't. Plus, I don't even think ACOTAR or the selection are all that good on their own to begin with. And on that note, we go from a jail tier to The Unmaking of June Farrow, which I'm putting all the way in God tier. The Unmaking of June Farrow, I actually just checked out from the library again to reread it, and I am not someone who tends to reread things a lot, but this book I read almost a year ago now. I'm still thinking about it. I loved it so much. This is a little bit of romance, a little bit of time travel, and a little bit of a mystery, and it's all perfectly balanced in the most atmospheric setting ever. And I loved it so much. This book has so much heart. If you haven't picked it up, I highly recommend it. The Final Girl Support Group. This is my first Grady Hendrix book. I'm gonna put this in You Were Good, I'm Waiting for You to Be Great. I know a lot of people don't like this, and honestly for good reason. There are some very uncomfortable scenes in this book. I also think the twist is pretty obvious and none of the characters are all that likable, but that is kind of the point. Fable by Adrienne Young. I'm also going to put this in You Were Good, I'm Waiting for You to Be Great, because while I did like it, I don't think it really left much of an impression on me. If you like Pirates of the Caribbean, definitely read this book. It has a pirate ocean ship setting, and that was fun. But I don't know, it didn't stick with me. The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches definitely wins the prize for the most difficult to say title. I'm gonna put this one in, I think, Living in My Head Rent Free. I don't think this is the best book I read this year, but it was so cute. It's about witches, a found family, and there's a bit of romance. Yes, the plot is very standard and again, a twist that you can see coming from a mile away, but it's not about that. It is definitely centered on the characters and their relationships. The Kiss Quotient. Ooh, I'm gonna put this in I Forgot That You Existed. I didn't hate this, but I certainly didn't love it. This is a romance that is basically a reverse Pretty Woman kind of retelling, and I think that's a fun idea, and our main character, Stella, is autistic. I just don't know if the representation and in her character was done that well for the entire book. For me, it felt very stereotypical a lot of the time. Normal People by Sally Rooney. I'm gonna put this one in Living in My Head Rent Free. I see why people wouldn't like this. You're following a very complicated and messy relationship between these two people. I will say though, I listened to the audiobook of this and I had no idea that Sally Rooney doesn't use quotation marks for her dialogue, which going forward actually makes me not want to physically read her books because that would drive me crazy. Also, the TV show is so good. We are on to one of my favorite books from 2024. That is The Warm Hands of Ghosts by Katherine Arden. I am putting this baby in God tier. This is one of the best books I have ever read, and it was Katherine Arden's new release last year. This is set during World War I, and I think more books need to be, because there's so much World War II content, and I get it, that's fair. But World War I seems to get glossed over at times. And yes, there is a ghostly presence, a bit of magical realism in this book that I thought was incredibly effective and touching, and I cannot recommend this book enough. It's hard to really even explain or put in words, but Katherine Arden describes the brutality of war without being egregious so well. The Reappearance of Rachel Price by Holly Jackson. I'm gonna put this in You Are Good, but I'm Waiting for You to Be Great. I thought this was a solid idea for a mystery. Instead of a murder or something, we have a missing person reappearing, and we're trying to figure out what happened to her. Where was she? I thought that was really cool, and overall the mystery I thought was really well executed. I just hated our main character. She was so annoying, and it got to the point where her descriptions and beliefs were just so repetitive that I would just roll my eyes and be like, yes, we know, you're suspicious. Yes, you're like, oh, I just kind of couldn't stand her. Powerless. This is another book talk darling, so I gave it a chance, and I am sad to say I absolutely hated it. I'm putting this straight to jail. This is, again, one of the worst books I have ever read. Not only was it poorly written and unoriginal, it was boring. For me, that was the most offensive part. At least Icebreaker entertained me, right? Powerless had me going, when is this going to end? It just went on and on and on, and nothing was happening. A lot of people compare this book to Red Queen by Victoria Aveyard, which I have not read, but I have read The Hunger Games and Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, which this definitely draws from as well. I honestly don't get the hype surrounding this book at all. Alright, then we have Where the Dark Stands Still. This was a debut, and I really liked it. I'm gonna put it in Living in My Head Rent Free. See, this is what I mean by not necessarily being the most original work, but at least being interesting. This is basically like if Howl's Moving Castle and Uprooted had a baby. It was cozy, there was a sentient house, which is one of my favorite tropes. While it wasn't perfect, I thought it had a solid ending. We're on the home stretch. Okay, we have Home is Where the Bodies Are. I'm putting this in jail. I'm so sad. This was my first Geneva Rose, and I love her on TikTok, but this book did not do it for me. Like Powerless, this is just incredibly boring. Nothing happens, especially for a mystery, and I think the culprit is obvious from the very first chapter. What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. I am going to put Living in My Head Rent Free. It's gothic and eerie. It has to do with mushrooms, and I don't know. I have literally no issues with this book. I don't think it's quite good enough to be God tier, but it's close. Caraval, or Caraval, I think it's Caraval, is going to jail. I know people love this series. I never read it when it was super popular 10 years ago as it was released. The only reason I'm reading it now is because I want to read Once Upon a Broken Heart, which is a series after this one. But now I'm questioning everything because I did not like this book. Some of the world building was interesting. It's like this magical game circus setting, but we have no information really about the fantasy world around this game. And worst of all, every single character was so annoying. I was rolling my eyes. I just wanted this to be over with. How to Solve Your Own Murder. I'm gonna put this in, Living in My Head Rent Free. I'm gonna be nice. Part of me wants to put it in You Were Good, I'm Waiting for You to Be Great. but this was so cozy, I haven't stopped thinking about it. I just thought it was a really unique concept, and it has this sort of quaint, cozy English countryside setting and writing style. It's very sort of Agatha Christie-esque. The Spell Shop by Sarah Beth Durst. I'm also putting this one in Living in My Head Rent-Free. Yes, it's a little bit slow and there's not a lot of action, but that's the point. This is cozy fantasy to the max. This is basically Animal Crossing if it was a fantasy magical island. If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio, I am also putting this in Living in My Head Rent-Free. Now, I can't sit here and say this was a perfect book. I do think it was pretty obvious from the get-go who the culprit was. But the vibe, it was so good. It was all vibes. The dark academia setting, the murder mystery, the Shakespeare of it all. I loved it. Tress of the Emerald Sea, we are putting in God tier. Brandon Sanderson does it again. This is his attempt at cozy fantasy, and I shouldn't even call it an attempt. It was a success. Has a really unique world and magic system, of course, because it's Brandon Sanderson. There's also pirates and a little bit of a found family, plus a talking rat sidekick. I love a cute little sidekick. It's definitely one of the most fun, adventurous fantasies I've read in a long time. Taylor Jenkins Reid, Carrie Soto is back, and this is going Living in My Head rent-free. This might actually be my new favorite Taylor Jenkins Reid book. She excels at character studies, and we're following a tennis player in this trying to make a comeback. And I'm not someone who is usually interested in sports at all, but for some reason I was on the edge of my seat while reading this book and its fictional tennis matches. And Mate by Ali Hazelwood. This is her YA romance inspired by chess. I'm gonna put it in You Were Good, I'm Waiting for You to Be Great. There's nothing really wrong with this book. It was cute, it was sweet, it just didn't leave much of an impression on me. Home Before Dark by Riley Sager, I'm gonna put in You Were Good, I'm Waiting for You to Be Great. This is probably my favorite of the 3 Riley Sager books I've read so far because it has a kind of haunted house setting, which again, I'm a sucker for. In fact, I was like fully invested in this book until the end. I do think the big reveal was a little bit unbelievable for me, and I did find a plot hole that I can't mention without spoiling things, but it definitely stuck out to me. Starling House by Alex E. Harrow. This is the other one I read by her, and I liked this one a lot better. I'm gonna put this one in Living in My Head rent-free. It's not a perfect book by any means, but it is a gothic story with a sentient manor house, again, which I am a sucker for. The Shadow of the Gods, also Living in My Head rent-free. Part of me wants to put this in God tier because there's nothing wrong with it. It is a Norse-inspired fantasy with a really unique world and magic system. We're following 3 different main characters, all of which I liked and was rooting for. This is also an incredibly action-packed book, but it just didn't give me that like 5-star feeling, if you know what I mean. Okay, we have The Whispering Dead by Darcy Coates. I'm gonna put this in I Forgot That You Existed. This is my least favorite Darcy Coates book I've read so far. It wasn't bad, I just don't think it was as good as it could have been. This is a series, so I might continue it and see if it gets any better, but I thought this was a pretty weak start. And last but not least, The Ministry of Time. I am gonna put it Living in My Head rent-free. I could criticize this book because it is essentially a sci-fi and a romance and a literary fiction book in one, and I don't think it excels in any of the categories because there's so much going on. But it is Living in My Head rent-free. I'm still thinking about this all these months later. And that is it. We are finally done. That only took 1 million years. These are all 90 books I read in 2024 ranked. So let's just take a look. We have the books in God tier. Truly the creme de la creme. I know I didn't put a lot of books up here, but that's because I am kind of picky. You know, there are books that I absolutely love in Living in My Head rent-free, like All Systems Red, or Bright Young Women, or Divine Rivals, but they just weren't quite that 5-star feeling. However, I still really enjoyed all the books in Living in My Head rent-free, and You Were Good, I'm Waiting for You to Be Great. I would still recommend all of these books. Going down to I Forgot That You Existed in Jail, these are books I would actively not recommend, that I would potentially even discourage you from reading. I mean, I'd say it's not bad having most of my books in the middle. I feel like that's a pretty standard bell curve, and I didn't have a lot down in Jail. There's only, 6 or 7? 7. So I feel like that's not that bad for 90 books. Alright, that's it. My voice is tired, I'm tired. I'm gonna leave you with the best books I read in 2024. I'm hoping I have an even better reading year in 2025. I want to know what are the best and worst books you read in 2024.